we watched a squaring off between Todd Anderson and Jerry Thompson. Same decks, different players. Last time it was a really hard-fought match, though, that went over to Grixis control in 3. You expecting to see anything different today?
Well, it's a very, we'll call it a very sensitive matchup. There's not very much margin for error on either side of the table. I think the matchup is favorable for Infect game 1, as there's a little bit too much clunkiness in the Grixis control deck. Assuming they have a lot of cheap interaction they can sideboard into, Grixis control I think gets the better of it in the post-board games, but being on the draw against Infect is dicey no matter what your deck looks like.
Yeah, when we saw this one yesterday, Jerry Thompson kind of carried to victory on the back of what's been a newcomer to Modern, his 2 copies of Pia and Kieran Nalaar. They were excellent in the matchup. Now, Wijaya is playing the same card here, also as a 2-of in his deck.
Yes, and it's a card that looks a little weird on the surface of it, but if Modern has room for a card like Huntmaster of the Fells, I think it has room for this card as well. It's a single color, and in a lot of matchups provides quite a bit more value.
Well, on the play, Smith starts out the game with a Noble Hierarch, though it is not long for the battlefield. Wijaya equalizes with a Lightning Bolt to go ahead and take down Noble Hierarch, clearing the board. For Smith, he will recover with a turn 2 Pendelhaven and Sylvan Scrying for Inkmoth Nexus. So setting up some land attack here.
A little bit of a different build here from Smith. We typically don't see Sylvan Scrying in Infect, although I have seen it before. It's uncommon. But this is basically another way to look for Inkmoth Nexus. When you already have Inkmoth Nexus, it's typically going and getting Pendelhaven. Yeah,
well, we do see cards like Crop Rotation show up in the Legacy version of Infect. So, though less efficient, I mean, not an instant, costs 1 more, it does make sense in this style strategy.
Doesn't put it right into play. Can't do it at the end of the turn. But the power level of the format is also quite a bit different.
So for Wijaya, it will be a Jace Vryn's Prodigy. We saw a ton of it today in Standard, making its presence in Legacy. Both Wijaya and Jerry Thompson, a full play set of Jaces in the main.
You see a Wild Defiance here from Smith, and I like the progression he has here. He has an Inkmoth Nexus, which is complicated for Wijaya to interact with. Smith gets to dictate the terms there. He has a Wild Defiance, that shuts off red removal. So now he's putting pressure on Wijaya to have something very specific like Terminate. And with something like Apostle's Blessing, Smith can power through that as well.
Yeah, so 2 copies of Wild Defiance in the main here for Smith.
A great card in matchups involving Lightning Bolt, or red removal in general.
Which this is one of.
Yes. And Wijaya had a great start here. You can see he's got Kolaghan's Command, Terminate, I believe a Dismember in his hand. I mean, you can't ask for a lot more in terms of interaction on the cheap against Infect game 1. But this curve here of Sylvan Scrying into Wild Defiance, next turn may make it very problematic for Wijaya to defend himself, even if he has something like Terminate.
And well, cards like Kolaghan's Command can still take care of artifact creatures through a Wild Defiance, but you're right, that 2 damage no longer really matters.
Yep. And a big concern here has to be something like Apostle's Blessing, which Smith has 2 copies of in his main deck. I believe he has in hand.
Wow. So for Wijaya, he looted with the Jace, discarding a land, played Serum Visions for the turn, so 4 cards in the graveyard. Did not hit land 3, however. Just a single red up. That may be a green light for Alex if he has enough pump. Especially with Wild Defiance, there are few cards on 1 mana that can hurt him here. And it looks like it is go time. And activation of Inkmoth Nexus. And he's going to go for Might of Old Krosa on Inkmoth. So the Wild Defiance trigger will try to happen first. That'll pump Inkmoth up to a 4/4. Might of Old Krosa up to an 8/8 already. And here's going to be the attack. 1 more targeted spell will put this out of range.
Yeah, Smith might be giving some respect to something like Murderous Cut at this spot. He can go for it again next turn and still have Apostle's Blessing at the ready. He had another pump spell. He could have just gone for it there, but I think his hand is powerful enough that he can afford to say, all right, I can respect some weird one-outers here and just go for it next turn, still leave up Apostle's Blessing.
Yeah, and with Wijaya on 8 poison, Inkmoth plus Pendelhaven would actually be lethal.
Yeah, I love that level of conservative play there from Smith. I think a lot of people would have just gone for it there. He actually might have been safe to go for it. I'm not sure if Wijaya had a way to stop it, but it's so likely he generates the kill in the same way the next turn that there's no reason to do anything risky.
Well, you're right. Murderous Cut's not an unreasonable card. We actually saw Jerry Thompson play it yesterday in his Grixis control deck. Now, one of the differences is that Wijaya has taken that spot and has turned it into a main deck copy of Dismember. So he actually doesn't have a Murderous Cut. But I do agree with you, that respect out of Smith just to play around that kind of card is very nice.
Also, Wijaya missed his 3rd land drop, so he's going to be jammed up on mana next turn anyway. If he passes with all of his mana and you feel it's risky, go ahead and pass with all your mana too. Send it right back to him. There's no reason to do anything risky.
So for Wijaya, just a third land and a pass of the turn.
So if you would like to play a two-headed giant this weekend, this is a last call to come and sign up for today's two-headed giant.
And we're back over to Alex Smith. So he only has the one Infect creature in hand. That's the concern, or rather in play, just the Inkmoth. So he needs to really make sure he protects it in this situation.
Yeah, now Smith's hand is powerful enough where he can start trying to consider some of the secondary plays that Wijaya could have. For example, what happens if Wijaya has Terminate plus Dispel? Is there a way for me to work around that? I don't know if there is, but Smith has red removal covered, and with Apostle's Blessing, I think he's just got most individual targeted removal spells covered as well.
So I believe this version of Infect that Alex Smith is running with main deck Sylvan Scryings and Wild Defiances is actually one that we've seen at the Pro Tour, told by Tyler Hill, actually managed top 16ing the Pro Tour, a player out of the Michigan area. Published a primer on the deck, a big proponent of both those cards. You don't see them in all builds. I know the Todd Anderson, Tom Ross school of thought is certainly not to run them. So here's another try by Alex. He'll go for the kill. It is a Dismember from Wijaya on Inkmoth. So when the Dismember is cast, Wild Defiance will trigger.
But Dismember rather still has a cover for the time being because the Pendelhaven hasn't resolved.
Right, so he did it in response to the Pendelhaven.
So if Alex goes ahead here for, let's say, Apostle's Blessing, and Wijaya has a Counterspell or a Terminate, he's in great shape.
And he'll go for Groundswell on the Inkmoth Nexus. Now, if there's that Terminate you were talking about, Wijaya could have it, and there it is. So he takes care of the Inkmoth. Groundswell does not resolve. Dismember. Everything in the yard. Wijaya takes care of the Infector.
Yeah, that was a risky play there from Alex, but it's very hard for him to play around everything forever. If he goes ahead and only attacks and says go, at that point, Wijaya can go end of turn Kolaghan's Command. That forces the issue on your Apostle's Blessing, and then you're in the same bind the next turn. It would have been hard for Smith to be two pieces of interaction. He went for it, got a little punished.
So he will get a chance to reload. Plays Inkmoth Nexus for the turn. So there's one Infector. Then Blighted Agent. So he has two more threats. Remember, all of these should be good enough to be lethal.
Standard open players. Welcome to round 4. You have 50 minutes. Please begin.
Looks like it'll be a mana leak on Blighted Agent. 4 lands, not 5 in play for Alex, so the counterspell will work. And we were talking before how Patience was such a great play by Alex. It may have nipped him a little bit here.
Well, with a second copy of Inkmoth, actually he's in great shape again because he still has the Apostle's Blessing. He still is representing lethal with the Pendelhaven. And if Wijaya passes and things look threatening, Smith has the option of just saying, all right, go.
Sure.
He's not in a rush to necessarily do something.
Yeah, and I guess, so what he lost his last Inkmoth to was a combination of Dismember and Terminate. Both those kill spells are good in that they do not care about Wild Defiance. I mean, how many of that kind of removal can Alex really expect Wijaya to have?
Exactly, you know, and it's very hard for Smith to sit there and wait to play around basically 2 Terminates.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it was. So back to Wijaya. 5th land into play here. No tar pits just yet.
And you might wonder, why is Wijaya not activating the Jace? The Jace would immediately flip, and I think because Wijaya isn't really interested in trying to flash anything back right now, what he's trying to do instead is wait to possibly chump block a Glistener Elf.
So this is a one of in Wijaya's deck he's going to play here. It is a copy of Rise Fall. So there's multiple modes on this, and the one that he's going to pick is Fall. So it is a, for those of you who haven't seen the card, it's a Hymn to Turok effect that when it randomly reveals a land, it whiffs. You can't make someone discard a land with it. But in this situation, it's pretty good. The 2 cards in Alex's hand were an Apostle's Blessing and a Rancor, so it's going to take care of both. For Smith, he plays a Noble Hierarch and now has to decide if he wants to try to go for the win with Inkmoth.
I think that Smith just passed the turn. 3 mana up represents too much stuff here. And most notably, Kolaghan's Command And if Wijaya wants to sit up with 3 mana, Smith gets a lot of draws towards something that can play over the top of Kolaghan's command. If Smith loses his last Infector to Wijaya and allows Wijaya to do it on curve, I don't think there's much hope of Smith getting back in this game, especially with Jace on Wijaya's side of the table ready to flash back and flash back a removal spell.
And Wijaya has Kolaghan's Command and more. His draw for the turn was a fetch land, and he has Kolaghan's Command and Snapcaster Mage as his 2 remaining cards. Seems like a great place to be here.
Though he's still at the mercy of a Wild Defiance off the, excuse me, not a Wild Defiance, of a Apostle's Blessing off the top. Game is not locked up just yet, even though his position is commanding.
Jace will plus and shrink down the Noble Hierarch. So we go back to Smith. Looking for a protection spell would be best, a Vines of Vastwood or an Apostle's Blessing. A pump spell may do well here also.
Pump spell is a little bit riskier because it's not like Smith has a shortage of that, and it doesn't allow him to push through Terminate or Kolaghan's command. Spell Skite would also be a huge draw.
2 copies of it in the main for Alex Smith.
He needs a piece of protection. A pump spell isn't really doing a whole lot for him that his board isn't already accomplishing.
Another thing interesting here, Alex actually has a main deck copy of Spell Pierce he's drawing to as well. We see here on end step, Wijaya will go ahead and terminate away the Noble Hierarch.
Well, it remains to be seen if Spell Pierce is relevant interaction here, because Wijaya can simply go cast Kolaghan's command in the event that Alex animates his Nexus and
he actually can pay.
So depending on if Wijaya's mana gets tied up on other stuff, maybe that can happen, but...
That terminate there on end step was off the Snapcaster Mage that had been in Wijaya's hand, so he now has a clock going. It's slow, but it's 2 damage a turn. And we are back to Alex Smith. 4 lands in play, a Pendelhaven and an Inkmoth among them. He has Wijaya at 8 poison. Wild Defiance in play as well. And we go back to a turn where he decided to play around Murderous Cut, doing it because I think he felt his position was very commanding.
Well,
and we agreed at the time,
yeah,
too.
his possession looked pretty solid there, but Wijaya with basically Dismember plus Terminate, that was important.
Right.
Then the Rise Fall was significant because Alex is going to be able to go off the next turn through 1 Terminate. So some specific stuff happened, but Alex may be getting bit a little bit by playing conservatively early on. And I liked the play at the time. I thought his hand was loaded enough that he was going to be able to play over the top, but that's not how this has played out.
Snapcaster continues to beat in, Alex down to 12. He will still have more turns to work with, but the wall of permission he has to break through is getting larger every turn from Wijaya. We see now 2 copies of Kolaghan's Command and a Snapcaster Mage in Wijaya's hand. With a Bolt in the graveyard, that Snapcaster represents a pretty reasonable clock.
Yeah. And I think another reason that Alex might have played passively earlier on in the game was because Wijaya had missed his land drop. So Wijaya basically needed to rip land number 3 and then have 2 pieces of Terminate level interaction.
It seemed like something that couldn't happen.
Right.
You see on end step here, Wijaya will go ahead and play Snapcaster Mage to Lightning Bolt Smith down to 9. A swing here of 4 puts Smith to 5. We're on a 2-turn, maybe 1-turn clock. Jace, -3. We'll give flashback to Rise Fall. He's going to go for Smith's hand again. This time he nabs another Rancor and a Become Immense. And the last card, Pia and Kieran Nalaar, which Jaya's going to go ahead and tap out for it.
This is risky here, as now I believe Rancor is a live draw.
Yeah, well, both of Smith's copies of Rancor have hit the yard off consecutive Rise Falls.
Well, the other side is I think that leaving up Kolaghan's command almost locks Smith out of the game. There are some weird draws that exist here that Smith can get in. It would have to be a 3rd Rancor, very unlikely, but the door was open there for a moment.
Yeah, so Smith makes a play. He activates Inkmoth Nexus, swings. Wijaya will block with a Thopter. Smith will pump with Pendelhaven. His play for the turn was another Inkmoth. We pass back, and now Wijaya swings the entire team. It's 7 damage coming in. He could sacrifice a Thopter for 2 more. And that'll do it. Game 1 over to Vidianto Wijaya. What seemed like a lost cause turned around for him, and now he is up a game.
Some very particular cards came to play there for Wijaya. The Rise Fall was excellent. The Dismember was great as well. Needed every piece of it to stabilize that game after Alex got off to such a great start.
All right, we'll go ahead and look into the sideboard. Alex Smith down a game with Infect. You said game 1 was his good game. Now he's going to have to win 2 sideboarded games. What's the plan?
Well, he's got 3 copies of Nature's Claim, 2 Wall of Roots, 2 Viridian Corruptor, 2 Twisted Image, 2 Relic of Progenitus, a Spell Pierce, a Piracy Charm, a Hercule's Recall, and a Dismember. I think you're going to see the 2 copies of Twisted Image come in as an answer to Jace Vryn's Prodigy. It's also just a low-cost card to bring in. Also can answer Spellskite if he happens to have that. And the 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus as Vidianto is using his graveyard for any number of things.
All right, on Wijaya's side, his sideboard is 2 Fulminator Mages, 2 Blood Moons. That one I want to get to in a second, because sometimes we see that against Infect. 2 Dispel, an Anger of the Gods, a Damnation, a Shatterstorm, a Vandal Blast. One that I'm pretty sure is coming in here, and is it Staticaster? A Keranos, a Counter Squall, and a Spellskite.
I love Spellskite, Counterswell, and is it Staticaster in this matchup? Staticaster, the best of the bunch here. The 2 copies of Dispel and the 2 copies of Blood Moon. I don't know, so you can have too much of this kind of effect, but I think he wants either the Blood Moons or the Fulminator Mages. They're great answers to the Nexus, and Blood Moon I think I like better of the 2 because there's some draws that Infect gets where they're just naturally locked by Blood Moon. They're on Breeding Pool plus Nexus and a Hierarch. You kill the Hierarch, you play a Blood Moon, and there's just nowhere for them to go.
Yeah, so it has this upside of locking him out of the game, but at the same time, it is a kill spell for Ink Moth.
High floor, high ceiling, and I love sideboard cards like that.
Let's see if he goes toward it. Vidianto Wijaya, sole possession of first place. We mentioned that earlier. He is 11-1. A win here should bring him into Sunday as we work our way toward the Players' Championship. Remember, the winner of the Invitational this year will join us next weekend in Roanoke. Big announcement this morning as you now see that remaining spot in the field still to be filled out. All these players here now be filled in are at-large spots. So we have the entire field, 7 players punching their ticket with the elimination of Chris Anderson from the Players' Championship.
And keep in mind, some of these players are still live to win the whole thing. So if we had to end up moving Ross Merriam or Joe Lissette or Todd Anderson's photo onto that championship trophy, Eric Hawkins will receive the last at-large bid.
Yeah, those 3 players joining Brad at the bottom. If you're a fan of Eric Hawkins, you're cheering for one of those 3 to take it down.
And they're in very good position right now, Joe Lissette especially.
All right. So we will bring you back into the match here. Smith will be on the play again. Grixis Control putting up great results. Jerry Thompson, he's the one undefeated player from day 1 at 8-0. Grixis Control was his modern deck of choice, so he's undefeated with Grixis at the moment. Wijaya, for the record, his 1 loss, that was in Standard.
He was playing Esper Dragons, took a loss to Jeff Hoagland. I heard that Blighted Fen was a big player against the Dragon Lord Ojutai control deck.
Indeed it was. I'm sure not the way he expected to get his Dragon Lord killed, but a very effective one. Jeff Hoagland with a black-white mid-control deck of his own brew. 7 wins, 1 draw. Picked up no losses in Standard.
Looked very impressive on camera. I only got to watch him once last run against Shaheen Sarani, which looked like an atrocious matchup for Jeff, and it was game 1, but his sideboard, getting to cut all the creature removal for more card advantage, more discard spells, looked like he was in a pretty commanding position in game number 3, but that game, unfortunately, for him, ended in a draw.
It's actually how his match against Wijaya played as well. He dropped game 1 there against Esper Dragons and took both the sideboarded games. So if he makes it into the top 8, now Jeff with Grixis Fairies was only 2-2 in Modern yesterday, but that top 8 tomorrow is Standard. If Jeff's there, he's got a chance.
Standard and untimed, and that's a very good mixture, especially 3 out of 5. If he's leaning on his sideboard to clean up a lot of his control matchups, since so much of his deck appears to be creature removal game 1.
Yeah. Interesting. I always like that about mixed formats, right? Where you'll have a player like Hoagland or maybe even Wijaya to a point where they have a really great deck in one of the 2 formats, and then the other one is they're just hoping to carry their second deck into the top 8.
Yep. And it's really nice when you get the 7-0-1 in the format that's going to be the top 8. You got to feel really comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
Even though Jeff, of course, has to be worried that Modern was not kind to him yesterday.
Alex Smith, also undefeated in Modern. His loss was in in Standard. So both these players undefeated Modern decks. Something will have to give.
Mm-hmm.
So we are underway with game 2. You see, Relic of Progenitus has been brought in out of the sideboard for Alex Smith.
Yeah. Another sideboard card I would describe much in the same way as Blood Moon as high floor, high ceiling. Worst case scenario, cycle it off, and some of VD's draws are really going to struggle without access to the graveyard. You see Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Snapcaster Mage, some Delve cards. He really needs his graveyard to be available.
Turn 1 Glistener Elf for Smith is met by a Lightning Bolt. Second game in a row, the 1-drop that Alex's 1-drop gets taken down. He will have another Breeding Pool. Now, we should note, no basics in play just yet as he goes for Blighted Agent. One thing I do want to actually mention here. So Alex actually had a Noble Hierarch in his opening hand. Now he has opted to go for Glistener Elf into Blighted Agent and opposed to playing Noble Hierarch, which normally when I hear Infect players, despite the fact the deck's named Infect, actually Noble Hierarch's the preferred one drop.
Yeah, you want more mana, and you want to be able to get in a spot where you're playing your threats with protection backup. So you usually want to be leading off with the mana. But I think Smith, maybe his curve's low enough that he just wants to get the creature into play and then started playing the Noble Hierarch the turn he intends to attack.
Well, a big win there for Smith. Wijaya's turn 2 play was Spellskite, which is kind of considered the gold standard against Infect. However, Smith was at the ready with Twisted Image. He switched the 1/4, killed it, drew a card, and then next turn hit in with Blighted Agent for 2 damage thanks to Noble Hierarch.
Well, Spellskite is the gold standard. Unfortunately, most Infect players have copies of Twisted Image in their sideboard. They can bring that in against all sorts of opponents, especially opponents that have Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Even if they don't have Spellskite, you know they have targets. So Spellskite, a great card if VD has it game 1, but post-board, Smith is equipped with a variety of answers.
Well, both players missed their 3rd land drop. So for Alex, that meant he got 2 poison. For Vidi, he just passed the turn. We go to Alex's 3rd turn as he hits in for 2 more. Or actually, pre-combat, he's going to play a Spellskite here.
You can see Wijaya there with Terminate in hand, but no black mana. His hand appears to be a lot of blue cards, some counter spells, and a lot of black removal, which you can't cast.
This is the punishing part of Infect. If Vidi misses a beat, Alex will definitely make the most of it.
Right. You do not have much margin for error. And it's really hard to mulligan, 2 lands, Lightning Bolt, Spellskite on the draw. I mean,
great.
You know what I mean? But
yeah.
Wijaya has now had a hiccup, and we might not be playing this game for much longer.
Yeah, Alex on his 4th turn did hit a land. So he's the first one to get past 2. It's a fetch land. And you see now fetching for basic forest. Maybe some respect for Blood Moon there.
I think there may only be, there's 3 breeding pools, yeah. So a bit of a hedge.
Blighted Agent will swing for 2 more poison. No pump spells just yet for Smith. Looks like his post-combat play will once again be a Sylvan Scrying. Checks to make sure it resolves, and it does. Inkmoth Nexus will go into his hand. So we go back to Wijaya. He also hits the 3rd land, however, it's a basic island, so still no black mana.
And you can see his hand there. Inquisition, 2 copies of Terminate.
Right, and that hand just seems like it would have been great. I mean, Lightning Bolt, Spellskite, multiple Terminates, 2 lands. Maybe none of them are black, but that's far too good to send back.
Yeah, that hand's not a mulligan, even though what you're seeing right now isn't too unlikely.
So you go back to Smith's turn. He'll go for a 2nd Noble Hierarch. You see the remaining cards in his hand? A Spell Pierce and a Groundswell. His land for the turn is Inkmoth Nexus. Alex may go for the kill.
With Spellskite in play, an opponent with a red up, and you have Spell Pierce left over, I would be surprised if Smith didn't.
He goes for Groundswell. It's going to be a Dispel on Groundswell. Spell Pierce takes care of that, and we're on to game 3. Alex Smith evens things up.
Can't miss a beat against this deck, even if you've got a lot of removal.
I mean, and that's a great draw from Alex. When you think about it, on the play, Glistener Elf, Noble Hierarch, Blighted Agent, Spellskite, a pump spell, Inkmoth, that's pretty hard to deal with for many decks.
Picked up a Spell Pierce too. That was a deck that was a draw that could beat 1 piece of removal, some good interaction there. I mean, VD had a bolt that he got to play, a Spellskite, and a Dispel over the course of that game wasn't enough.
There was a Twisted Image for the Spellskite. Even just forget about that in the mix.
Right.
So, commanding performance there, game 2 for Alex. We'll go back to the sideboard. Now, he's on the draw here. Does that change much about the matchup?
No, I think that he still wants the copies of Spell Pierce and the 2 copies of Relic Progenitus, the 2 copies of Twisted Image. If he wants it, he can bring in the Dismember. I think Vidianto's deck is pretty good against that. Most of the threats that he had comes into play value stuff. It's really only Jace and Tassiker, but if he's worried about numerous Spellskites on the other side of the table, it's possible he'll bring in the Dismember on top of the copies of Twisted Image.
So I actually have an interesting question about Twisted Image. So we've seen Twisted Image in Infect sideboards for the last couple years, really ever since Infect started getting played. However, what's new here is with these Grixis Control deck that Wijaya and Jerry Thompson's playing, it's the first time we've seen decks with 4 copies of Jace Vryn's Prodigy in the main deck in Modern. So the stock on Twisted Image seems to be higher than it's ever been before. I mean, we look at the targets in Wijaya's deck. There's Jace, there's Spellskite, and there's even, is it Staticaster?
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff you can tag. And other decks, including the Infect Mirror, Noble Hierarch is a presence. Some decks play with Birds of Paradise, so there are targets in the format. If Jace becomes more and more popular, you might see some of these, for example, Smith's deck here, he's got the 2 copies of Wild Defiance, 1 copy of Dismember, 1 copy of Spell Pierce. You can kind of call these flex spots, even the 2 copies of Spellskite, kind of in that space. It's not really dedicated towards the combo kill, but you have some wiggle room here. You have room for a little bit of utility. It's possible that 1 or 2 copies of Twisted Image starts working its way more and more into the deck if Jace becomes a standard 3 or 4 of in variety control decks.
Yeah, it seems in these matchups, it would be a lot of times the danger of Twisted Image is that the card can be dead sometimes. It just doesn't seem like it'll happen against Vijaya's deck.
Yeah, you always have the out of cycling it, but cycling it comes with some risks because if your creature gets killed in response, it's a disaster.
Right.
So it's tough to rationalize in the main deck unless you're expecting a lot of copies of Spellskite. But again, if Jace is added to the mix too, it starts to become more attractive to have a copy or 2 in your main deck.
So a quick game 2 for Alex Smith. And this is really the dogfight we saw yesterday between Todd and Jerry, between these 2 decks. The ones where Grixis wins, it seems like, if you look at the game 1 that Wijaya won, and both games that Jerry won yesterday, even when Grixis wins, they win with, 5, 6, 7, 8 poison on them.
Yes, you're going to take your shots early on in the game. It's pretty hard to avoid. And Infect wouldn't be a viable deck if just a Bolt or a Terminate broke up everything that you were doing. So it's always going to be hairy on the Grixis side of the table, but once you get past turn 3, turn 4, I think the removal spells become broad base enough, and you back them up with enough discard and enough counter spells that things do tilt towards the Grixis deck pretty fast in the matchup. It's just getting out of the first 3 or so turns to be able to leverage cards like Snapcaster Mage, Terminate plus Counterspell backup, and those sort of sequences that you really need to be able to beat the Infect.
Gosh, I sense Grixis has been great this weekend.
Jerry Thompson, Todd Anderson, both live for top 8 currently. VD first overall in the standings, all of them playing Grixis Control, all of them with multiple copies of PA Kira Noir in the main deck. All of them on Chase Friends Prodigy.
Yeah, for Wijaya, a win here means he could basically put away the Grixis deck.
Yep, he's good to go with a win here.
The 5-0 he would get in the winner of this would get in Modern could just be enough. For Smith, the 1 draw means that a win here will put him as a favorite to make top 8, but I believe he would need another win after this.
Yeah, he has a little work left to be done with a win here. VD, on the other hand, should be locked up.
These players currently in first and second. We are in round 13 of 16, the last 4 rounds. But 4 rounds out, only Vidianto, sole possession of first place. Smith, sole possession of second. We saw on the leaderboard a lot of players nipping on their heels at X and 2, and some big names there as well.
Yep, a lot of big names. A lot of players already qualified for the Players' Championship. This is the kind of matchup, typically I think Infect mulligans pretty well, because you're kind of to just stick together a couple cards, and decks like that are robust when they mulligan. Since Grixis Control is trying to pick you apart card by card, the mulligans are really punishing. The Inquisitions, the Thoughtseizes, the Terminates, they become a lot more powerful when Smith doesn't have enough resources to recover.
And Alex Smith, this is a name we haven't really seen before, but I want to talk about his tournament here. So he went 7-0-1 yesterday, and in the first 4 rounds today, let's just talk about, he went 3-1, defeated Jerry Thompson, the only 8-0 player, defeated Sam Black as well. This has been quite, quite the lineup of wins he's accruing.
Anytime you're making a deep run in the Invitational, there's no way that you get to a record like 10-1-1 while you're avoiding the good names in the room. It just doesn't work that way. There's too much talent, and the best players typically are going to be the ones you see at 8-0 and 7-1, 6-2 at the end of the days. And a 10-1-1 record in this kind of tournament speaks for itself. You don't need to know about the roster names, because I promise you there's some real good wins all the way. The one Invitational that I top 8, this was many years ago, but my one Invitational top 8, I believe I played either 5 or 6 of the other top 8 members somewhere along the Swiss rounds.
I mean, with these long tournaments, that does end up happening.
Right. It's a lot of rounds, and there's some cushion with the record because of attendance relative to round size. So towards the end of the day, you start running into a lot of people who have either locked up top 8 or close to it.
All right, so Wijaya will be on the play for the deciding game. Smith on the draw. Smith down to 6 cards. Does get a scry before the game starts. Looks like it may have actually been 5 cards. The scry is placed to the bottom. So, down 2 cards. We'll see what he's kept. Wijaya will start off the game with Inquisition of Kozilek. We see Glistener Elf, Blighted Agent, Groundswell, and a pair of lands. Pretty good for 5.
Yeah, it's not, you know, the biggest thing for Smith on 5 cards is having redundancy in threats. Against Grixis Control post board, you can expect that your first thing is going to die. There's just too much removal. And the minute that Infect gets to a spot where they're out of Infect creatures, all the deck does is wait to draw an Infect creature, because so much of the deck is just pump spells. So having 2 Infect creatures in the opening hand, really important to be able to survive the attrition that Wijaya is going to bring to the table.
So this is an interesting one. You mentioned about running him out of Infect creatures, but it looks like Wijaya's actually picked the only pump spell in Alex's hand to get rid of, the Groundswell, and is going to leave him with the 2 creatures.
And that's really bad news for Smith, because Wijaya is representing that he has answers along the curve for the first 2 Infect creatures and values the pump spell more.
See, before we go ahead and resolve this, he's informed him he's taking the Groundswell, but is going to write down the rest of the hand. Looks like actually maybe he's still deciding.
Okay.
Yeah, actually goes for Blighted Agent. So correction there, leaves him with Glistener Elf and Groundswell. So Smith will get his 1-drop of Glistener Elf. So this means that Wijaya has the Glistener Elf covered?
Most
Hopefully,
likely.
yeah.
Yep. It also might mean that he's planning on blocking, if that's the path here.
Okay.
We could see something, for example, like turn 2, just cast Snapcaster Mage and try to block. It's also possible that he just has an answer on curve to the Glistener Elf, but may want to be doing something with his 3rd turn, so he'd rather spend turn 2 answering this and turn 3 doing whatever it is he wants to do.
For Smith, fetches Breeding Pool, plays that Glistener Elf. Go back to Wijaya. Does he have the kill spell? Looking through his deck, see he has brought in Fulminator Mages out of the sideboard. You mentioned, great answer.
Yeah, it looks like no Blood Moons, but Fulminator Mage came in.
And you're saying one or the other was probably necessary?
Yeah, one or the other is necessary. The second one, and you start drawing too many LD spells against a deck that's killing you with 1-mana creatures.
Makes sense. Inquisition of Kozilek number 2 takes another Blighted Agent out of Smith's hand, and then Lightning Bolt from Wijaya clears away the Glistener Elf. So in 2 turns, Wijaya has taken care of 3 Infect creatures out of Alex's hand.
And this is the vulnerability of the deck. At the end of the day, there's only 12 creatures you can realistically win the game with. When you don't have them, your deck's just a bunch of pump spells waiting to draw one of those threats.
Wijaya tries to rebuild with Serum Visions. Does not hit a 3rd land, so here's a window for Alex.
Does have a spell Skype, something. Not as good as having an Infect creature here, but if Wijaya's hands on Lightning Bolts, it could actually be preferable to drawing an Infect creature at this stage.
But it looks like the stumbling will not be for long. For Wijaya, his draw was a Polluted Delta. That's land number 3. And that opens the door to all sorts of plays. You see Snapcaster Mage, Thought Scour, Pia, and Kiran Nalar, all in waiting in Wijaya's hand.
Wouldn't be surprised to see Snapcaster play this turn, getting either the Inquisition or the Serum Visions back. Inquisition as a last piece of disruption, and Serum Visions as a path to lane number 4 to get Pia, Kiran Nalar into play.
If Wijaya is snapcasting Serum Visions, that's a real show of power in the matchup.
Yeah, if you can do that in lieu of playing a discard spell.
Here's Snapcaster. We'll see if it's either discard or Serum Visions, and you're absolutely right. He's going to go for the cantrip.
He's not under any pressure, and he's got a path to a very good play here, so this play does not surprise me.
A draw and a pair of scries for him. And both cards on top. That is not the news that Alex wants at all. We go back over to Smith's side. He has drawn an Infector. It's a copy of Inkmoth Nexus. He'll play it and pass.
That's something. I mean, it's got to start there, and a creature is so likely to just get killed by some removal spell that the land's probably the best thing. Smith can bide his time and try to improve his hand before making any attacks.
Well, we see the first card that Wijaya kept on top was a Scalding Tarn. Looks like we never will see the second one, as he'll shuffle away to go ahead and get another land here. But 4th land means he now has access to that PN Kiran Nalar. And perhaps he can't use kill spells on Inkmoth due to Spellskite, but he certainly can block it. He'll go ahead and play the legendary creature, and a pair of Thopters will come along.
I think it's so important to have a mixture of all this stuff to have a good matchup against Infect. If you're overloaded on removal, you can lose the game to something like Spellskite. If you're overloaded on blockers, then Blight Agent, sometimes Inkbot Nexus can kill you. When you're attacking them from both sides, they don't have a clear path to get out.
For Smith, draws, has no plays, he'll pass back. Now Wijaya has all his mana back, and he'll start some attacks. Snapcaster Mage, Piankiran Nalar, and even a Thopter token gets in.
Smith asking him to cooperate there. Maybe he sent in the last one. I don't think Wijaya's going to have any part of that.
No, one of those seems like it has to be there for blocking. So 3 damage will come across the Spellskite, blocks some. See Smith at 13. And Jace Vryn's Prodigy added in for Wijaya. Both Lightning Bolt and Thought Scour still in Wijaya's hand.
I think we are approaching the end of the road for Smith in this game.
Well, thanks to Spellskite, it's possible that there exist threats that he could protect, right?
Well, Rancor is the big one because he's got to be able to get Trample to play over the top. There's no way that Wijaya is ever going to let the shields down on at least a blocker, so he needs to get a Trample effect. That's the starting point. With Rancor and a window, maybe he can seal the game, but that's the card I think he needs.
All right, end step was Thought Scoured for Wijaya, has drawn a few more lands, and picks up a Snapcaster Mage off Jace. So now the Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, will become the Telepath Unbound. And he'll go ahead and flashback that Inquisition of Kozilek. Wants to know exactly what he's playing against. And it looks like it is a Vines, a Groundswell, and a land.
Yep, easy take of the Vines here.
We talked before about how Grixis normally wins at about 8 poison. That doesn't look like it'll be the case this game. Alex has not gotten any damage across.
Mulligan to 5 and a great curve from Wijaya. And Smith never really got any footing in this game.
Hand on head, you see, yeah, he knows the pressure he's under. I think if there's something he can do. Picking him apart with these value creatures as he maintains a comfortable buffer of removal spells. Spellskite will go in front of Snapcaster Mage. 3 damage will go at Alex. He's down to 10. And from Alex, it looks like we have another Infect creature to join the mix. It's a copy of Glistener Elf. And he'll go ahead and pass. Now at this point with Smith at 10, he may not even be able to race Grixis. And you see Wijaya adds more creatures to the board. He goes for a Snapcaster Thought Scour on end step.
Yeah, not a lot to be done with flashing back the bolts right now because of Spellskite in play, so Wijaya just going to gas back up.
And the draw, this should be the insurance policy. It was a copy of Kolaghan's Command.
Yeah, now he has a clean answer. It's not damage base. And if the current set of circumstances wasn't too much for Smith to overcome, then I think that Kolaghan's Command is the last piece.
Lightning Bolt, Kolaghan's Command, Snapcaster Mage in hand. 6 lands in play, both players at 10 life, but Wijaya on the attack. 5 creatures in play. He'll start with Kolaghan's Command.
Imagine we're seeing Shatter plus discard here.
He'll discard a Forest. Spellskite is down. Jace will plus to shrink Glistener Elf. And here comes the team on the ground. He's going to leave back both Thopters just as a double insurance here.
Yep. This is not a display of weakness, but a display of strength. Yeah. He's so far ahead that he can afford to be ultra conservative, play around cards, maybe doesn't even know. He might even be able to tell you what he's playing around right now, but he's that far ahead.
Glistener Elf will chump the Piankiran Nalar. And that will do it. Smith draws, looks at the board, and knows he is dead a turn out. So In 3 games, Vidianto, Wijaya, and Grixis Control take the match. And with that, this should be our first player in the Invitational top 8.
Congratulations to Vidianto, Wijaya. A dominating performance through both portions. Appears to be the first person locked up for the Invitational here in Las Vegas.